Okay, so plant responses. 99.9% of the time, if a plant is responding to stimuli, the way that it responds to that stimuli is by changing its growth patterns. Okay? So we say that all plants respond to external stimuli by changing their growth patterns. So what does this mean? It means that either they're going to grow up, or they're going to grow out, or they're going to elongate one part of the stem and keep the other part shortened. Just change the way that they're actually growing. Maybe they'll grow a totally different type of tissue versus one tissue type versus another tissue type. They're just changing the way that they're growing based on external stimuli. This is the only way that 99.9% of plants can respond to external stimuli. There is an exception to this. The exception is called nastic movement, right? So the exception to this rule is called nastic movement. Okay, and nastic movement is controlled by turgor pressure. So nastic movement, which is controlled by rapid changes in turgor pressure.
Is there like any specific reason for us to call it turgor?
I don't know the root of the word, if that's what you're asking. When a plant is full, when the central vacuole is pressing up against the cell wall of the plant, they call that cell turgid. Right? They say that it's turgid, and it's turgid because it has high turgor pressure. But I don't know the root of the word. I don't know why they chose that specific word. Okay, so a good example of this is this guy here. Okay, this is called the Mimosa Fern, and you can see it exhibiting its nastic movement here. And the way that this works is sort of like a mouse trap. Okay, so if anybody's ever set a mouse trap, the way that you do it is you use a lot of force in your hand, and you have this spring-loaded sort of snappy thing, spring-loaded bar that you pull back, right? And then you put this little tiny clamp on it in the middle, right? And so you can think of each of the leaves in this Mimosa Fern here as being like the mousetrap. Okay, so the leaves are forced open slowly. It takes a long time to do it, and then they're held open by this grouping of cells in the middle that has a really high turgor pressure. Okay, so the grouping of cells in the middle is holding them open, and by taking that turgor pressure out of the cells in the middle rapidly by releasing the water, it causes the mousetrap, the leaves here, to then snap closed, right? You can tell it's not super duper fast, right? But the thing that's really not fast is it opening back up. It's not going to be able to just go open back up in the same speed that it's closing here. It's going to take it hours and hours and hours to pump enough water back in to open it back up to the point where it can do this again. Yeah?
When the water leaves the cell, where does it go?
It's different for different plants. Sometimes it's actually expelled from the plant, right? So it comes all the way out in like a little water droplet. In this case, it's traveling down the stem, right? And that's actually why it's cascading like this. And it's going to go back down into the stem. Okay? So that's nastic movement. Like I said, nastic movement is one of those things that we touch on because it's cool. But for the most part, it doesn't apply to like 99.9% of plants. It's very rare. Okay, so for all the other plants, they're going to do the normal plant response, which is to change their growth patterns. Okay, let's look at plant responses to light first. Okay, so plant responses to light are going to be mediated by 3 different light-absorbing and light-sensing compounds. Plants have three types of light detecting molecules. Those types are phytochrome, which is a protein complex that detects red light. Cryptochrome, that responds to blue light only blue light, right? And then a class of molecules called phototropins. And the phototropins are going to mostly respond to blue light. Some red. Asterisks. We're pretty sure that it's the phototropins that are mediating the red light driven activity, but it could very well be phytochrome just doing some weird stuff. Okay, so mostly blue, possibly some red in the phototropins, but mostly blue. All right, so let's talk first about phototropism. It's probably the easiest to understand. This is growth towards light caused by elongation on the dark side of a stem. Okay. So we're going to draw a weird plant here. This clearly does not exist, but makes the drawing much easier. Okay. That's a stem. It's a big stem that contains 6 giant cells, right? Obviously, there's no stems that contain 6 giant cells, but like I said, it's just easier to draw this way. Here's some leaves on top. Okay. So, we are going to expose this thing to a light source. Okay? And that means that one side of the plant is getting light, and the other side of the plant then is going to be shaded. Right? So I can refer to these sides of the plant as the light side over here, and this is the dark side over here. Oxen is a lot like Anakin Skywalker in that Oxen is drawn to the dark side, right? Sorry. I apologize. Drawn to the dark side. So over here you get a buildup of oxen on the dark side, right? And that buildup of oxen on the dark side then causes H+ ion pumps on the dark side to then start pumping H+ ions into the space where the cell wall is. And the decrease in the pH, then the increase in the acidity around that cell wall causes it to soften on the dark side, which then allows for the central vacuole to fill up more and then causes those cells to elongate. Okay, so we can say that oxen builds up on the dark side, causing cell walls to soften and allowing those cells to elongate. So, have here an example of this. Okay, so here's my stem that I've drawn. It's got two sides to it, right? One side of the paper, the other side of the paper, and they're equal length right now. When they're equal length, the stem stands straight up, right? If I want to get this to move in a specific direction, like let's say my light source is over here, all I have to do is make one side of the stem longer than the other side, right? So I'm going to take this side and I'm just going to fold it like this. So now this side is shorter, right? The side that's over here is shorter, so here's the light source. But they're anchored together, right? And when they're anchored together, you can see that on the shorter side, right, it has to cover a distance by sort of going diagonally, where on the longer side, it sort of curves over, right? And so the end result is if the light source is over here, it causes it to curve towards that light source. See what I'm saying? Okay. So, this looks something like this. Or you can tell that on the dark side then, the cells are elongated. They're longer than they are on the short side. Here's our leaves. And then here is our light source. Which means now the dark side is over here. So what does that mean? If all the stem is in the dark side, what happens? Yeah. The whole thing elongates, right? And so it's going to elongate in whatever direction it was going, which means the entire plant is going to go this way, which is towards the light, which is good because that's going to increase the intensity of light that it's getting. Now, in this case, it might be bad because it's growing towards an artificial light source. It's growing towards a light bulb, and so the heat is probably going to be bad. But evolutionarily speaking, the chances of it getting high enough that it reaches the sun are low, right? So, questions on phototropism? Yeah.
If this light source is like directly above, it would just keep going up.
It would keep going up until it touched the light source. Yep. All right. But hold on to that. It's going to make more sense in this next thing. The next thing is called the phytochrome response. Phytochrome response is obviously controlled by phytochrome, whereas this was controlled by phototropism, or phototropins. Maybe we should write that. Controlled by phototropins. Okay, and those phototropins are responding to blue light, right? And so if you have them just in red light, they're probably not going to show a phototropism effect or phototropism response. Okay, so the phytochrome response, though, is changes based on the type of light that's hitting a plant. Changes in growth pattern. Based on the type of light plant is exposed to. And there's going to be two types of light that we're going to look at. Okay, the first one is called red light. And red light is going to be the type of light that's in direct sunlight. Okay, then you've got what's called far red light. Okay, this is light that's had its wavelength reduced by bouncing off of different things, right? And so this is going to be indirect sunlight or shade. Okay, so this next part is confusing, and I'm just gonna put that out there right away because it's confusing and it'll be confusing, and you just kind of got to force your brain to work with it. Okay, the way that these things are named is phytochrome red (PR) and phytochrome far red (PFR). Okay, so let's start with PFR. PFR is the active form of phytochrome. Okay, and because it's active, it's going to promote all types of growth in the plant. And when I say all types, I mean like, terminal buds, axillary buds, and cambiums. So all types are going to be stimulated by the presence of PFR. Okay? This is the confusing part. PFR is the form phytochrome takes when exposed to red light. Okay, so let's go on and talk about PR. PR is the inactive form. Of phytochrome. Promotes only upward growth. Which means only terminal buds. Okay, and then again, here's the confusing part. PR is the form of phytochrome, or the form phytochrome takes, rather. When exposed to far red light. Okay, so again, this is probably backwards to the way that you would normally think they would name this. PR means that it is exposed to far red light, and PFR means that it's exposed to red light. Right, so it's backwards, right? Okay, so let me try to explain why. There's a light switch. Okay? This light switch is in the up position, correct? Okay. How do I change this light switch?
Apply force.
Apply force. What type of force? Downward force. Okay? This light switch can only respond to downward force. If I continue to apply upward force to it, it's just going to remain exactly the same. Right? So when they are naming these types of phytochromes, they're talking about what type of light it is going to be able to sense. Okay? it's already in red light, so sensing red light is not helpful, okay? If it's already in red light, it's going to want to sense the presence of far red light to be able to switch to the other type, okay? Just like this light switch here is already in the up position, so applying upward force to this light switch is worthless. This is the light switch that can respond only to downward force, right? So, based on the same naming convention, we would call this switch down. Right? So switch down can only respond to downward force. And does so by switching or changing to switch up. I wrote swith again. Switch up. Okay, so this is switch down, and switch up looks like that. Right? We're talking about the force applied in order to change it. Okay? Just like PR, the force or the type of light required to change this is red light. The type of light required to change PFR is far red light. It's got plenty of red light on it, so it's already in PFR form, right? Just like switch up here, if you applied downward force to it, it's not going to change it at all because it's already as far down as it could be, right? You can only respond to upward force. Does that make sense? I know it's confusing, but it's the way that they named it. Okay. Okay. So there's two identical plants down here in two different situations. One of them is in direct sunlight. In direct, not in indirect, right? It's being exposed to direct sunlight. Okay? So this one is being exposed to direct sunlight here. So what type of phytochrome do we have? What's that? So this is only PFR. Okay, so what type of growth is this going to experience? What? All growth, yeah. So this plant is going to be like, hey, this is great. We're going to get bigger. We're going to get taller. We get bushier. Everything's all good, right? Okay. This one, though, is in the shade. And because it's in the shade, that means that it's mostly going to be PR. I say mostly because, like, you might get a couple of little beams of light traveling through this tree, right? But mostly PR. So what type of growth is this going to have? Upward only. The point of this is to allow this this plant then to get above the tree. Because when it gets above the tree here, it's going to get some sunlight. And at the tip of the plant then here, what type of phytochrome do I have? PFR, which is going to do what? All growth. So now it's going to start branching outwards like this. Okay? So it's like, uh-oh, I'm in the shade. I'm not getting all the resources that I can. So I'm going to spend all of my energy in growing a very short, very thin, very long stalk up above the shade. And then I'm going to start growing outwards once I get above the shade. Make sense? So then what happens to this tree? Right here. On the tree. What? Yeah, it's going to start having PFR. It's going to get shade. And that's going to cause this tree to then grow up over this plant. And then get bushier. Right? Plants are constantly in a turf war with one another. They're constantly trying to get all of the sunlight that they can. They're constantly trying to, shade out all the other plants and outcompete them. This is how plants compete for resources, specifically how they compete for sunlight, is they always want to get above the other plants and then shade them out. Okay? Now, there's all kinds of different strategies that plants use for this. Like oak trees and stuff, they grow pretty slow, right? But they're going to ultimately win out. They're going to be the biggest thing around, and they're going to shade out all the stuff around them. And if you go into an oak forest or something like that, there's nothing on the ground in an oak forest because everything is totally shaded out. There's no bushes. There's no, grass or anything like that because there's no way for the light to get through. Okay? But if you go to like a new, let's say there was a forest fire or something like that, there's not going to be a lot of oak trees around because they all burn down. And what you're going to see is a bunch of grasses, tall grasses, like 3, 4 foot, 5 foot grasses, and those grow in a growth pattern where they grow really tall, really fast, trying to choke out everything else and prevent those oak trees from even getting a start. Right? But the oak tree is playing like the tortoise game where it's doing slow and steady, getting taller and taller and taller to the point where it can then shade out all those grasses and stop them from growing. Right? Make sense? All right. Last thing today, let's talk about photoperiodism. Photoperiodism is a plant's ability to change its growth patterns based on night length. Okay? So there's this thing called the critical night length. Okay? And the critical night length essentially means that there's going to be a buildup of some compound that's produced maybe in the daytime or maybe in the nighttime. And if that compound reaches a certain concentration or a certain molarity, that's going to cause a specific type of growth response in a plant. Okay? And the way that the critical night lengths work is different for different types of plants. Okay? So there's 2 different types of plants that we're going to look at. The first one, and they're named terribly. These are the worst names for them. Okay? So the first ones are the short day plants. And I say it's a terrible name because it's named short day plant, but in fact it's only able to sense the night length, and so it's actually a long night plant. Okay, so generally speaking, when do we have short days and long nights?
During the winter.
Yeah, during the wintertime. So these are going to flower in the fall / winter. Okay? And they are going to flower whenever their critical night length is exceeded. Okay, so let's say we've got an 11-hour day. And a 13-hour night. Okay, and let's say that for this particular species, the critical night length is 11 hours. 11-hour critical night length. Okay, so if this is a short day plant or a long night plant, right? We know that it is going to flower whenever its critical night length gets exceeded. Right? So sure enough here, we had a 13-hour night, 11-hour critical night length. So enough of the compound that was being produced at night here got produced to get over that threshold concentration, which caused the flowering response to begin. Okay? So this would flower. So plant flowers. Okay, this is in contrast to a long day plant, which is actually a short night plant. And those are going to flower in the spring or the summer. And they are going to flower when the critical night length is not met. Okay, so let's do our same day up here. We're going to do 11-hour day, 13-hour night. The cheat. And then let's say this one has an 11-hour critical night length. Okay, and so we see that this 11-hour critical night length is met, right, and exceeded. There was a 13-hour night, and there was only 11-hour critical night length. And so this one would not flower, so no flowering. Now, the way that we figured out that it was the length of the night that mattered, not the length of the day, is we figured out that if you take a short burst of light here, okay, let's say this is 20 minutes of light. During the nighttime, so now we've got this going on. We actually have what the plant perceives as a, I don't know, 6-hour and 40-minute night. Okay, and then this has a 7-hour night over here. So The 6 hours and 40 minute night was less than 11 hours. The 7-hour night was less than 11 hours, and therefore this causes it to flower. Make sense? So we didn't change the day length at all, right? All we did was add a very short day in the middle of the night, which tells us that the night length is the thing that actually matters, okay? So, a couple things about this. I've written flowering as the important response here. And sure, flowering is probably the most visible one, but there's also a lot of other things that change based on the night length and the day length. Okay, remember how we talked about the potatoes? Having the sugar source be the leaves in the summertime and the sugar sink, or the sugar source being the potatoes in the springtime. This process here is also controlled by photoperiodism. So as the length of the days get shorter and shorter and shorter, it starts storing more and more of its sugar into the tubers because it knows, it doesn't know, it's not smart. But it has evolved to have that step before winter comes so that it has the vast majority of that sugar stored up in the tubers, right? Another kind of cool thing here is this is happening like right now, right? Because in approximately 3 days, there's going to be a day where a lot of people want to buy roses and carnations and tulips and stuff, and none of those things should be flowering right now. And so in big warehouses, big grow houses, what they have are a whole bunch of non-flowering plants that are exposed to very long nights like this, maybe 13-hour nights or something like that. And maybe tonight, probably last night, in the middle of the night, they flashed them in the middle of the night with a 20-minute period of bright light, right? And that's going to cause them all to start their flowering response on the same day, right? So that come 3 days from now, when everybody wants to buy flowers on Valentine's Day, they have freshly flowering plants, and that's how they control when they flower, so that on the day that they need this influx of flowers, right, they know exactly when they're going to have that influx of flowers because they flashed the plants, 4 days before that to start their flowering response. Make sense? Anybody have questions on that? That's it.